I'll hit record and you're on, mate. You can go.
Cool. So yeah, a little mini summary of this paper today, talking about bone stress injuries in long distance runners. So stress fractures or the early stages of stress fractures. We've seen a couple of people in the clinic lately who possibly might have the beginnings of a stress reaction. So we decided this paper would be a good paper to look at. And also going to show you a few screenshots of a webinar I listened to last night with a physio who specialises in long distance running from Australia. So it worked out really well. What we're going to sort of talk about is, I guess, what is a bone stress injury, a little bit touch on the pathophysiology of it, and sort of explaining how they come to be, and sort of talking about the continuum of the bone stress injury. And you can see that in the second page of the article. We're going to look at sort of the epidemiology of a bone stress injury, what sort of where I guess is the most common locations of the body that get they get the most stress with long distance running. Going to be talking about the risk factors involved, what internal and external sort of factors play a role in determining who gets a bone stress injury and who doesn't, I guess, and sort of a little bit of focusing on diet and nutrition, because that's a huge part in it. From there, looking at sort of a diagnosis and the different stages of a bone stress reaction and different sort of categories, and how as a clinician we would spot a bone stress injury through, which is mainly through a subjective examination, but there's also some common signs and symptoms that we'll go through. And then from there, we'll look at the management of both low risk bone stress injuries and high risk bone stress injuries. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two, but the management is, I guess, mainly pretty straightforward and simple, but challenging because it's a long and delicate sort of management. So I guess that's a quick summary of what we're going to talk about. Is there anything you want to sort of go from there, Eyes, or
just maybe like I don't know with the article, but just maybe go through some of the key findings.
Yeah, sure.
Relevant that we can build on for next.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I was sharing my screen now.
Please do.
There we go. Cool. So I guess what is a bone stress injury is, with long distance runners, triathletes, they are running a long distance, surprise, and with lots of load with running, our bones, our muscles, our tendons get stressed, and this is good because then a little bit of stress gets repaired naturally by the bones, by the muscles, by the tendons, and they get stronger, and then they get used to running these long distances. But what happens when this stress repair or damage repair gets outmatched by the load that we're putting them under? So this, I guess, this diagram slide shows it really nicely that if you can see my mouse there, if we're loading our bone through running, our bone gets strained, which is good because this bone can heal, and this leads to strain related remodeling, which is good because our bones get stronger. It allows us to run further next time. But if our bone damage sort of outweighs the remodeling, there can be a chance and it leads to an imbalance between the damage and remodeling. And if we were to continue running at these high loads, we find that an accumulation of damage comes up, and before we know it, our bones can get damaged and cause a stress reaction, then a stress fracture, or in extreme cases, a complete bone fracture. And if you can, sorry, I'm just going to have to try and screen share a couple times. So here's a screenshot, I guess, I took from last night. I guess another sort of way of explaining this continuum of bone stress injuries. So we're looking over here with normal remodeling, a little bit of bone strain, as they call it. Our bone is able to handle that and heal naturally, as we would with any sort of run. But over time, if this load that we put it under gets too much for our bones to heal, damage can occur, and this can get, I guess, there's a whole range of sort of risk factors that determine who gets it and who won't, sort of thing. And there's different sort of places around the body that have high risk bone stress injuries. So places of bones that genuinely find they're under more stress than others. And as you can see over here, the return to running sport timelines are quite long, and they get quite high depending on what grade the stress reaction or fracture is. Any sort of comments with that?
No, just quickly, that's, a nice continuum. Does that, I guess, ask you, does that fit well with your thoughts around stress reaction and fractures? And do you have any thoughts on that?
So are you talking to me or?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't say that enough. Sorry, Nat. Yeah, do you have any thoughts around that? Sorry, Nat. You're right.
Yeah, no worries. The first thing that usually comes to mind with all of these stress fractures is the Ottawa ankle rules, like trying to rule out fractures. But I know there's so much anatomy there. And I think going through this list of the high risk occurrences, I think it's a good idea to practice your anatomy and go through all of that and kind of get a better idea of what my question is do you notice that the pain is easy to pinpoint with the stress fracture?
That's a great question, Nat. I'll let Jack just potentially solve one. What are you, from what you've seen, what are your thoughts?
I guess, that was my first and only experience of a possible stress fracture. And the way, palpation of the joint is obviously a huge part in determining if it is or not. But with the person in question, the bony structures weren't, he wasn't jumping up and down with on palpation. So we're at the moment ruling it out. But from what there is parts of the foot, with the Ottawa ankle rules, they're quite pronounced, the bones that we're sort of palpating there. But when we're talking about the femoral neck and other bones, palpation, it's quite difficult or not at all possible. So it's really the subjective history of pain that just doesn't really feel right, and a bit achy and dull achy, and only sore when you're putting load under it. So when you're running, standing on it, and it doesn't really get better during a run, as like a tendinopathy might, sort of thing. It's always sore when you're on it, and then it's not sore when you're off it, I guess, is the thing. So it's a different sort of subjective things that we're listening out for some of those sort of trickier spots to pick up.
To answer your question now?
Yeah.
And I just want to say that it was a very good, and Riley, just for your benefit, you're probably just hearing terms that you have no idea what we're talking about. But the Ottawa ankle rules are something you will learn. They're literally rules to determine whether your ankle has a break or not, or a fracture or not, sorry. And they are actually quite relevant for stress fractures because that's what you want to rule out, because the stress fracture is still a fracture itself, particularly when you're looking at like your, as it is, your navicular or your base of fifth.
No, we're just on a.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so you're just working through it.
You're right.
So
I think it can be kind of tricky also sometimes because the person may also have tendinopathy as well going on in there. So
yeah,
just from all of the stress. So yeah, I think it can sometimes take more time than you'd like to.
absolutely. The differential diagnosis, and we saw that with the case that Jack's talking about, was very relevant. You know, it's hard to, with any sort of overuse injury, sometimes to pinpoint exactly, you know, what it is. And there may be an element of both. And that's why in treatment, which we'll go into a bit more detail next time, you know, we want to look at and discuss around, you know, how to best offload it, then looking at the biomechanics and looking at what we've got to do to help manage it and get it better, I think is really important. So I think there's a lot of different elements there to it, which is why it's just so relevant that Jack did listen to the talk again last night, which we'll build on, like I said, next week. But it's important to understand that continuum is very important, because people hear stress fracture and think that's the start. I think we need to print that out, Jack, if you remember.
Yeah.
Can you send that? Can you send that to Riley and just get it printed out straight away? Because I have that stress fracture patient tomorrow, which would be good to look at.
Yeah, we'll do.
Are there any other? And Riley, did that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Keeping it really simple, because there will be people that watch this video later who might be a little bit confused as to it. I think the biggest thing for you, Nat, is to remember it is a continuum, and why it is so important to try and pick up as early as possible. You can see that even from the accelerated remodeling to the stress reaction phase of grade 1, you know, that's sort of where pain starts to come in, but it's almost the dysfunction's already happening a lot earlier. So it's another reason why I believe there's still, you know, really good, you know, reasons to look at screening and different, you know, elements like that, for sure. Jack, anything else that you just wanted to set up for next week?
Yeah, just one last one. So yeah, just talking about this quickly, just the risk factors. You guys can see that screen, can you? Yeah. So yeah, very similar to, I guess, a lot of the running, one of the running sort of talks we had a couple of weeks ago. There's, you know, biomechanical factors that relate to bone stress injuries, and that is all about load. So training patterns, how much, how hard, how often, how soon between runs, and then a little bit of sort of biomechanics, how we run, but that's not a huge factor. How strong our muscles and our bones and tendons are to withstand the force, and then a little bit of footwear and running surface, but not too much. Going over to biological factors on the other side, so I guess they sort of talk about our ability of the bone to resist load and prevent that cumulative damage piling up, and that sort of is around sort of our athletic history. So how long have we been running for? So novice runners who have just started running long distances are more at risk. Our medical history, so previous history of bone stress injury is a huge predictor of future bone stress injury. And the big one there is energy availability and bone health. So family history of osteoporosis or low bone density relates to the bone health and energy availability, which is a big one that Brad Beer spoke about last night, which, you know, I never really considered or anything, but our energy availability is a huge part of, I guess, how much energy we're consuming, how much we're eating, because long distance runners, you know, expend a lot of energy running. They need a lot of food coming in, a lot of energy coming in. And I guess if you're thinking about people who are increasing their running load for a marathon, let's say, they're going from, let's say, 5-10 kilometer runs to, you know, 20-30 kilometer runs, or say 20 or 30 kilometer weeks to upwards of 80, let's say 100 kilometer weeks. That's almost doubling their running load. But how often would they actually double their energy intake? Because that's pretty much what they're doing, expending their energy, doubling their energy expenditure. So they've got to doubly increase their intake, and that's pretty hard to do and pretty hard to change their routine of what they're eating. So we'll go over a little bit of that next week, but that really stuck to me because I was like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. No one really eats a whole lot more because they just eat what they're usually eating. And then calcium and vitamin D status, and of course sleep and life stress.
I think that's a great place to stop and to think about that. But you can see when we're addressing these things, we have to look at the bigger picture as well. That energy availability was new to me too, actually. Thought about it, but I've never really utilized it as a tool. So I think that's really cool. Did Brad say he's going to give you the slides?
Not 100% sure. I hope so. I'll have a look at my sort of junk email.
Check. I'll message myself. But maybe as we just finish up, Jack, I think it'd be a good idea actually just to review this. Utilize the article as part of it, and we might make our own presentation and then chat off the back end of that, because the article was great, but it was more a bigger review than we'll chat about what to do next week and maybe send it to Nat and Avi before. But yeah, any take home just from that little summary, Nat, that stuck with you?
What I think is interesting too now is how nutrition is becoming more incorporated in our profession, because it's so important to educate people about bone health and just also overall health of our tissues, and how nutrition plays a role in recovery. So I'm glad that you included that I don't know what the rest of your presentation entails, but I think it's really interesting to cover that as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think the same. Is there anything either of you guys go first, Riley? I like to do anything you picked up from that little screenshot?
Probably the same as what Nat said. Like, you wouldn't really think to go down the nutrition path, but it obviously is important and a factor that needs to be considered. So yeah. Yeah.
Jack, you the same or anything else?
Yeah, I just wouldn't even sort of think about energy availability and that in there for stress reaction injuries. That's a good one to sort of bring up with Ian and with Grant, or some of our runners, to speak about with the nutritionist sort of sessions that they have.
I hope we sort of when we speak to Ian at the end of the week, we can actually talk to him about just about that, and making sure it's up to it's really good, because it could just make a difference. And always think, I guess, to finish with that, energy availability and nutrition isn't just important for bony stress; it's important for everything. So if you're treating someone with an inflammatory condition, if you're treating someone who is just a bit acutely inflamed, or is acutely sore, just know that what they put into their stomach definitely has an impact on how they will heal and how they will react. So
Yeah.
it's a good place to finish. So Nat, we're going to create a new WhatsApp group because the rest of the just for this specific journal club, which would be fun. Yeah, we'll put. I think Jack and I will put something together for you to read before the next week, and we'll have a bit more of a discussion. I'd like to get more into as well the treatment and the application of it as well. So we'll talk about that as well, how we can apply it. But that's cool.